So for those of you who may not know, I am bisexual, don't worry, only for the attention. I was first made aware of this by my own brain back in the distant year of 2014, when bacons were epic, narwhals were awesome sauce, and the words Brexit, COVID, and NFT were complete nonsense to me. Now is the time of monsters. And part of how I managed to work out that I wanted to kiss men as well as women, and then quite a few other people as well, but that's another story, was through the media I consumed, through the movies and television shows I watched. And yes, partly that just meant going to the cinema, seeing Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson standing next to each other and asking, hey, would you like some meat in that Avengers sandwich? But there's also the small matter of what we would call representation. Seeing queer characters doing their thing, literally just existing, was affirming for me, and I know it has been affirming for a lot of people in the LGBTQ+ community. The only problem is that bisexual representation in 2014, by and large, let me put this delicately, sucked well, actually, it would be more accurate to say the bisexual characters just didn't exist at all. Now, of course, there were characters who were kissing men, women, and plenty of other genders, don't get me wrong. They would just rather die first before actually saying that they were bisexual. And knowing most TV writers, they will, in fact, die first. Captain Jack from Doctor Who kisses men and women and everything else that moves, never says he's bisexual or pansexual or anything else. Also, John Barrowman turned out to be an interesting guy. Oberyn Martell from Game of Thrones, shown sleeping with both men and women. Head crushed like a watermelon, fantastic. And a very special mention to Piper Chapman from Orange is the New Black, who cheats on her husband with a woman and only says she's bisexual in the last season, which aired in, 2019? 2019? Anyway, I feel like you get the picture I'm trying to paint here of the media landscape I grew up in regards to representation, and that's just bisexual representation I'm talking about. Gay and lesbian representation was a little bit better, but far from perfect. Trans people were almost always either victims or non-existent, and all the other letters, forget it. You'll take your glee and you'll like it. As much as representation had advanced since the 20th century, queer people in the 2010s were still relegated to being side characters in most stories, and in the few pieces of media where they were allowed to take centre stage, these were often either clogged with stereotypes or ended in tragedy and death. Or both. All over the internet, especially on Tumblr, young queer people were so desperate to see themselves in the media they loved that they started doing deranged things like, oh, I don't know, shipping two characters from BBC Sherlock together who'd never even met on screen. Not me, obviously. I was sorting all the Doctor Who characters into Hogwarts houses and getting front row seats for my parents' divorce, but my point is that there was a severe lack of happy, light-hearted stories where queer people got to be openly and unapologetically themselves. Stories where children and teenagers like me could see that this lifestyle didn't have to lead to misery, isolation, and death. Stories like Heartstopper. Heartstopper, based on the webcomic turned graphic novel written by Alice Osman, follows two high schoolers, Nick and Charlie, as they fall in love and attempt to navigate the trials and tribulations that come from being in love at such a young age. The show also features Nick and Charlie's friends, who represent other aspects of the LGBTQ+ spectrum. Now, I'll be honest, when I was first recommended the show by more than one person, I was a little skeptical, bearing in mind that I'm not familiar with the source material, and that the quality of teen dramas in the last few years has been...
In case you haven't noticed, I'm weird.
Name?
Senorita Awesome.
Because you're all minorities. You're in the Glee Club.
Dear viewer, I do not use the term cringe lightly, but Heartstopper largely sidesteps the feeling that every line of dialogue was written by a 50-year-old with an English degree. Probably because it was all written by a 27-year-old with an English degree. 27? Alice Osman is turning 28 this year, and they're only 3 years older than me.
I might have laughed if I remembered how.
This actually realistic sounding dialogue, in combination with a wonderful dreamlike atmosphere conjured up by animations on screen, some great soundtrack choices, and some genuinely inspired framing and lighting choices, this feels like a show that's had a great deal of effort put into it. And this is a Netflix show, so that's really rare. But I think even though it has that heightened, drifty vibe to it, what strikes me most about Heartstopper is just how normal it is. It's the kind of slightly cheesy love story that straight people have been getting since cinema began. It avoids sensationalizing queer relationships and, spoiler alert, doesn't have anyone die at the end, which is a very nice change of pace. The queer characters struggle, they have problems, but one, like I said, they're problems that straight people have been having in these sorts of things for years, and two, they're problems that queer people struggle with in everyday life. And that kind of show is all we've been asking for years. Just a nice, realistic, happy, queer hangout show where everyone gets to be nice and no one dies or gets shot or gets AIDS or ends up going to super giga epic hell. I want to put a disclaimer here before you rush to the comments that I have never in my life watched an episode of Supernatural, which makes me marginally better than those of you who have. Thank you for your time. So that's a brief overview of why I like this show so much, but I want to get a bit more specific. I really want to dissect what exactly makes Heartstopper such a breath of fresh air. Also, I'm unable to consume a piece of media without intellectualizing it, and I'm going to make that your problem now. There's a fair amount to cover here, so I'm going to be breaking this video down into sections depending on what characters and what storylines I'm talking about. We're going to go L, G, B, T. What will he think of next? So let's not waste any time getting into it. I hope that if you haven't seen Heartstopper, this video convinces you to watch it. If you have, I hope it convinces you to rewatch it, and if it doesn't do any of that, you can rot. Let's go!
Here we go, lesbians! Here we go, lesbians, come on!
So our resident lesbians are Tara and Darcy, who have been dating for a little while but are keeping it under wraps. Darcy is publicly out as a lesbian while Tara is still in the closet. And two things to note right off the bat is that Tara and Darcy don't fall into the common WLW stereotype of multi-level marketing. They don't fall into the common TV stereotype of one woman in a lesbian relationship presenting more feminine and the other presenting more masculine. Now, this is obviously how plenty of lesbian relationships in real life look, and that's fine. But when relationships in TV between two women are so often presented in this way, it puts across the idea that there must always be one man and one woman in any relationship, even queer ones, and all that does is reinforce heteronormative ideals. And those are the worst kind of ideals. The other common TV trope they avoid is relationships between women being overly sexualized, which is especially weird when you keep seeing it in shows about high schoolers.
Are you a sicko? What is this?
Darcy and Dara still behave like girlfriends, they kiss and they hold hands, but they're not banging right there on the science room table while Crazy in Love slowed and reverb plays over them. Fun fact, by the way, someone at my school actually got expelled for jerking off during a science lesson. Just in case you wanted to know what the British education experience was really like. Dudes rock, of course. Tara also gets to have a coming out story of her own in parallel with Nick. In episode 6, she publicly posts about her relationship with Darcy on Instagram for the first time and receives a wide array of reactions, from slightly overzealous support to outright apathy to homophobic bullying and fetishization. I'll talk about this a little bit more in the next section, but I think this episode really excels at showing the differences in coming out as gay as a woman versus coming out as gay as a man, how both the supportive and non-supportive reactions manifest differently based on the gender of the coming outer. It's also nice to see Darcy supporting Tara through all this, acknowledging that since Darcy has been out for longer than Tara, she will have better coping strategies in place for homophobic bullying than Tara will. Plus, everything is resolved out in the open and inside one episode because they actually communicate with each other, instead of this being used as some catalyst for some cheap drama where they break up and then they get back together again and then they break up and then this repeats ad nauseum until one of them dies of turbo AIDS or something. And that's pretty much everything that I can say about Tara and Darcy that specifically relates to them being lesbians and acting as lesbian representation. They are ultimately side characters and do make contributions towards other character storylines, which I will get to in a minute. But it would be nice in any potential season 2 to see their relationship expanded on even further so that they can share the spotlight a bit more with Nick and Charlie. And speaking of Charlie, don't tell me you're going to delay the cut here just for a cheap joke.
You sound like you're gay.
Yes, I am gay.
I can tell.
Thank you.
So I fully accept that there may be gaps in my knowledge here, me being Austin Powers' international man of mystery years old, but from where I'm sitting, Charlie is the best young queer character we've had in years, mostly because he actually feels young, and not what someone 2 decades older than him thinks is young. He talks and makes decisions and stresses over things like a teenager, which makes him endearing. You want to see him succeed. I can even see a little bit of myself at that age in Charlie, except for the part where he washes and cuts his hair, ever. My friends, I look like Daryl Dixon from The Walking Dead if Daryl Dixon from The Walking Dead was about to be put down for his own good.
What the hell is even that?
Charlie's story, the main story, also avoids being sensationalized. He deals with homophobic bullies, but it's realistic and not like, oh, let me just think of something that no one in their right minds would ever write down and put on a TV show. So let's say, having a broom shoved up his bum.
Welcome to Liberty High.
Netflix giveth, and Netflix taketh away my reason to live. Okay, anyway, as I said previously, the way that straight people react to Charlie coming out is contrasted with the way they react to Tara coming out. Charlie is ostracised and mocked, belittled by what Harry the bully and his friends consider effeminate behaviour, while Darcy is fetishised, told on social media by straight men that it's such a shame that she's a lesbian. It's very interesting to see the difference portrayed on screen between how bigoted straight men react to gay men with disgust, because they believe that they will now be seen in the same way that they view women, versus how they react not more positively but sometimes less aggressively when a woman comes out as a lesbian, because they still view women as objects for their sexual gratification, even when that woman has explicitly said that she's gay. These straight men just now have to do more mental gymnastics to convince themselves that they could have a shot at having sex with this woman. And that contrast is handled very well, another thing I did not expect from a teen Netflix show. Or any Netflix show. Or any show. I am tired. Heartstopper also does a great job of showing how the isolation that Charlie faces from this bullying negatively affects the way that he views his sexuality. At the beginning of the show, he's so ashamed of being gay that he's happy to settle for Ben, someone who is taking the pain of their own sexual journey and using that to emotionally manipulate Charlie. They only meet up in secret when Ben wants to, and never outside of school hours. They don't appear to have any real conversations or share any actual interests, and Ben is also unfaithful to Charlie. Furthermore, he pops up again later in the show when Charlie is feeling at his absolute lowest, just to belittle him. I wasn't sure whether to put Ben in the G or B section of this video since he doesn't appear to know himself, but I think he's a really good example of how people struggling with their sexuality can still be meanies, let's say. He's another one of the side characters, so he is out of focus for a good deal of the show's runtime, but from what we do see of him, it's clear that he acts as a sort of dark contrast to Nick's own coming out story, which I'll touch on more in the next section. He has utterly no regard for the way that Charlie feels about anything, and lets the fear of being outed turn him into someone nasty and predatory, to the point of forcing Charlie to kiss him at one point, which is a pretty cut and dry case of sexual assault. Many queer people go through a period of self-loathing when they're first figuring out their sexuality, and Ben is there to show how this can make them a danger to themselves and others, especially when this happens in a homophobic environment like an all-boys school. A coming out journey is not always sunshine and rainbows, and people can get hurt. With that said, I want to give a very, very special shout out to Heartstopper for not having the bully character coming out as gay himself, thereby saying that all homophobic bullying is actually the fault of the queer community and resolving any real heterosexuals of complicity in gay hate crimes. I mean, I can just imagine if a show was really insane, like if they were really off the rails, they would have the bully character come out as gay and then date the person that they used to relentlessly bully for an entire season. But that would never happen. They would never air that on a show, on a teen show, on a Netflix show, that aired last year. I'm getting off topic. To sum up this section, I think it's great that we see Charlie go through the realistic trials and tribulations of being gay, as well as the trials and tribulations of being in a relationship at his age. The initial crush, the falling in love, the self-doubt, the potential breakup, and then the sweet, sweet resolution to it all. I'm making video essays on YouTube, so I've obviously never experienced any of that myself, but I have it on good authority that that's what it's like. And yes, I am going to beat you over the head with this once again. It's just nice to see a gay boy having a nice coming out story without any massive tragedy befalling him or his boyfriend. Let's talk about that boyfriend, shall we?
Abed, it's called chemistry. I have it with everybody.
Everybody!
Now, this looks like a job for me. The B in LGBTQ+ standing for, obviously, British. And British people still face discrimination worldwide just because our Egyptian artifacts are better, and our Greek artifacts are better, and our Indian diamonds are better than everyone else's. So to see characters just getting to be British out in the open like this, no fear of discrimination, it just makes me sick. The sooner that little pile of trash in the North Atlantic sinks beneath the waves, the better. Anyway, who's this weirdo who likes boys and girls? Nick Nelson is the boy that Charlie has a crush on and eventually starts dating. Over the course of the show, he goes from believing he is straight to considering that he might be gay to realizing that he is bisexual and publicly coming out as such and dating Charlie publicly. Also, according to people on social media, I look like him, just as I look like every other white boy with brown hair, but judge for yourself. Look, if people want to say that I can still pass for 18, I'm sure as hell not going to correct them. So I spoke about the bisexual representation that I had growing up. Either they didn't say they were bi, or they were sex crazed, or both. Therefore, it brings me great pleasure, my friends, to report that Nick Nelson gets no bitches. Well, actually, he spends a great deal of the show attempting to awkwardly avoid the advances of one of his female friends, which is just unrealistic because no bi person had any girls interested in them in high school, and it presents unrealistic expectations, and they should therefore cut it out of the show immediately. Please. But my point here is that Nick Nelson shatters so many of the bisexual stereotypes that we have seen too often on TV. Even just him identifying himself explicitly as bisexual was spiritually cathartic for me. All those years of, well, I just don't like to put labels on things, melted away like tears in rain. The rain is also my tears. And the stuttering, unsure journey that he goes through before he can proudly declare himself bisexual is obviously quite relatable for me. And a lot less embarrassing for him because he didn't realise it after spending 12 hours a day on tumblr.com. Come to think of it, maybe I was just brainwashed by all the gay fan art. I'm cool with it. Now, there was one moment when I thought Heartstopper was going to betray me. As I mentioned earlier, one of Nick's friends, Imogen, spends a lot of the show trying to get Nick to go on a date with her, and Nick is awkwardly pushed into it by Harry and his friends. Even though he's not really attracted to Imogen, he's attracted to Charlie. So naturally, the alarm bells were ringing for me. Oh god, they're going to have the main bisexual character cheat on Charlie, and it's going to be manufactured drama, and oh no, it's Piper Chapman Part 2, and God has come to reap the sinners. But Heartstopper knew this. It knew the pain that I'd been through, the trauma I'd suffered at the hands of big media. And so Nick Nelson, king that he is, gently lets Imogen down, tells her that he's not straight, and all this before they even get as far as holding hands. Do you see how normal that is? It feels like something that could happen to a bisexual person in the real world, and almost certainly has happened to several. Again, not me, don't rub it in. But there's such a truth to his coming out journey and the way that he approaches the whole thing. Even little things like watching a movie and realising that you're attracted to both the male and female lead, taking gay quizzes and getting wildly inconclusive answers because the only two answers on there are gay and straight. The two genders. And then at the end of it all deciding about whether you want to be out at all, whether the young Tory freaks that you go to school with deserve to know anything about your personal life. And the aforementioned science self-pleasurer. Plus, to top it all off, Nick is just a nice guy in a difficult situation, and he's trying to do his best. A bisexual character with a strong moral compass, immediate best in show. Immediate best in show. He could hit the entire rest of the cast with a bus in season 2 and he would still be the best in the show. It's Nick Nelson's world, and how humbled we are to get to live in it. Nick genuinely gives me hope that the future of bisexual representation will be so much better than its past, that kids growing up now will be able to work out that they're bisexual from shows like this and not from the scraps that they get thrown by mainstream media. It gets thrown around a lot to the point of losing all meaning, but representation really does matter. I can't wait to meet the next generation of bisexuals that this representation mattered to. Actually, I can wait. I feel like enough of a grandpa on the internet already without fully grown adults telling me they were born in like 2010. I'm sorry, but if you came out of the womb post-toxic, you are a little baby to me. Goo goo gaga, etc.
Trans rights.
Now this section is going to be a little bit shorter than the others, mostly because everything I want to highlight about Elle's character and storyline is things that I've highlighted about the other characters already. Namely that it's very nice and good to see a trans character who has cute issues like developing a crush on a close friend, and not the sort of issues that end up with her dead at the end. Especially in the current climate. Especially in the current UK climate. No biggie, but I basically do live in hell. And so I think that Elle's relatively low-key story in comparison to Charlie and Nick's is even more impactful for the show to explore. Just like Charlie, Elle's history of being bullied because she is transgender does inform part of who she is, but it's not everything about her. The main crux of her storyline is her developing a crush on her friend Tao, who is pretty much the only cisgender heterosexual person in the main cast. It's nice for them to get some representation as well, and how Elle deals with this. Another one for the books here, Tao's heterosexuality is never called into question when he starts reciprocating Elle's feelings, which is something that we have seen far too often in media. A man attracted to a trans woman must be queer actually, because trans women are not real women. There are definitely other creators on here who could go into the nuances of this trend far better than I could, but in short, trans women are of course real women, and if you disagree, argue with your Harry Potter tower because I don't care. In fact, as we are told through Elle's storyline, it turns out that trans people are people with wants and fears and problems just like the rest of us. Who could have guessed it? Quite a few people, but we can't all have two functioning brain cells and coherent politics, unfortunately. And her drama-free friendship with Tara and Darcy is also a lovely little bit of LGBTQ+ solidarity. They immediately accept her for who she is, and when she's forced to go back to the boys' school she used to attend for a sports day, they stay right by her side and help her through what could potentially be a very triggering experience. But she ends up having a nice time because she's surrounded by a friend group with the most immaculate of vibes. Isn't that nice? Isn't it nice that kids today get to have something like this, and my generation got scarred? More gay hangout shows is the message of this video. Ultimately, just let all the letters chill and be easy and be themselves for 8 episodes at a time. Homophobic bullying optional.
You're still here? It's over.
At one point in the show, Charlie tells the audience that he never thought this would happen to him, and that's how I feel about Heartstopper in general. Having lived through the 1 step forward, 2 steps back era of 2000s and 2010s queer representation, to have a show like this that is so unapologetically gay and trans is incredible. And that's just me. I imagine that queer people who can remember even further back than that will be even more amazed at how far we've come. I only hope that in any potential season 2 that Heartstopper moves its side characters even further into the spotlight and also makes some space for other marginalised members of the community like asexual people or non-binary people. Regardless of the future, Heartstopper Season 1 is a breath of fresh air, both as a queer show and as a YA show, and I highly recommend you check it out. Folks, the gay agenda has won again. Praise be. Don't forget about Our Flag Means Death. Well, they haven't even said when they're going to air the bloody thing here yet, so I can't say that much about it, can I? I told you I live in hell.